Good morning to my little people. Glad to see you here today. I spent some time trying to get my actual lesson plans kind of done. So I feel like for me, I'm getting a late start. You all won't be noticing. But I kind of wanted to just kind of take a deep breath. We are going to be finishing up week 2 of the Giver this week. And that will take us on Friday into a test day. There are a handful of you that are kind of running behind a little bit on lessons, and I've tried to contact some of you to kind of get those into me. This is my Sunday, which will be your Monday. So this afternoon I will be hopefully uploading all of these scores into Infinite Campus. That is my goal. So it just depends on how long it takes me to get these videos uploaded onto YouTube and then get everything built into Google Classroom. These take a little longer than most people realize to kind of get them done, but that's okay too. So if you are curious about your grade, wanting to know what's going on, hopefully by tonight at some point you should be able to pop into Infinite Campus and see those. So want to get back into our story. Our end in mind is I will compare and contrast events, characters, and situations in our story. So when we stopped on Friday, we were discussing how Jonas and his friends' interactions were different than what they were before. They've had one day of going to their new jobs, and then the next day they've come back to school, and there's a marked difference in how they're interacting with one another. Before their job placements, they were very courteous. They were very respectful. If someone was speaking, they would wait their turn. No rudeness, I guess is what I'm looking for. There is a difference now. And the difference is that they're all trying to talk at once. And in doing that, they keep interrupting each other, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. And they're, sorry, my nose is itching. They are trying to be aware of not being rude, but it's like they're so excited and they can't wait to tell each other about what happened. And so that is the difference that's taking place. They're just kind of talking over each other, being overly excited, and that type of thing. So that is an example of comparing and contrasting events. The event of before they went to their jobs versus after they went to their jobs. So we're comparing how that took place and then how the kids interacted with that. Now, our vocabulary for this week is we have prohibited, which is not allowed. It was prohibited for more than 300 people to be in Walmart at any given time due to the COVID-19. Diminished means it is lessened. Unintentional is accidental. It was unintentional when I stepped on Eli's foot as I was trying to get by him. It was accidental. Obsolete is old and outdated. We have comprehend, which is to understand. Relinquished is gave up. And I like to think of the Prince of England. Is it Harry? He relinquished all of his prince duties to live what he considered a more normal life. So he relinquished those. Lingered is stayed around. And then we have neglected is forgotten. Now, if you have had time to look at your Team Talk vocabulary, you would have realized that it was those fill in the blanks. So they're giving you a sentence and they want you to insert the correct word in there. So you might want to be looking at those throughout this week, filling those in on your own time. And then on Friday, Thursday afternoon, or Thursday's video, we will be doing that day's Team Talk vocabulary, and then we'll be checking that for accuracy. So we're only going to be doing one day together. The rest of these days you can do on your own and then self-check, and because you have the definitions in your Team Talk. So we're just going to go from there. What I'd like us to do is I want us to take our book and we're going to pick up on page 115. Remember, we kind of didn't do a full lesson on that Friday. I said it was almost as if we had an assembly program or something that cut our lesson short. So we got to kind of pick back up today and see how much we can get through. So 115. Let me give you a second to get there. All right, so I tell you what, let's start on 114 because there's kind of an important thing that took place on 114. Let's start with where it says Jonah stood. Did you find it? Great. So Jonah stood for a moment beside his bike, startled. It had happened again. The thing that he thought of now as seeing beyond. This time it had been Fiona who had undergone that fleeting, indescribable change. As he looked up and toward her going through the door, it happened. She changed. Actually, Jonas thought, trying to recreate it in his mind, it wasn't Fiona in her entirety. It seemed to be just her hair, and just for that flickering instant. He ran through it in his mind. It was clearly beginning to happen more often. First the apple a few weeks before, the next time he'd spin the faces in the audience at the auditorium just 2 days ago, and now, today, Fiona's hair. With frowning, Jonas walked toward the annex. I'll ask the giver, he decided. Well, the old man looked up smiling when Jonas entered the room. He was already seated beside the bed, and he seemed more energetic today, slightly renewed and glad to see Jonas. Welcome, he said. We must get started. You're 1 minute late. I apologize, Jonas began and then stopped, flustered, remembering there were to be no apologies. Well, he removed his tunic and went to the bed. I'm 1 minute late because something happened, he explained, and I'd like to ask you about it if you don't mind. Well, you may ask me anything. Well, Jonas tried to sort it out in his mind so that he could explain it clearly. I think it's what you call seeing beyond, he said. And the giver nodded. Describe it. Well, Jonas told him about the experience with the apple, then the moment on the stage when he had looked out and seen the same phenomenon in the faces of the crowd. Then today, just now, outside, it happened with my friend Fiona. She herself didn't change exactly, but something about her changed for a second. Her hair looked different, but not in its shape nor in its length. I can't quite, Jonas paused, frustrated by his inability to grasp and describe exactly what had occurred. Finally, he simply said, it changed. I don't know how or why. That's why I was 1 minute late, he concluded, and looked questioningly at the giver. But to his surprise, the old man asked him a question which seemed unrelated to the seeing beyond. When I gave you the memory yesterday, the first one, the ride on the sled, Did you look around? And Jonas nodded. Yes, he said, but the snow in the air made it hard to see anything. Well, did you look at the sled? And Jonas thought back. No, I only felt it under me. I dreamt of it last night too, but I don't remember seeing the sled in my dream either, just feeling it. And the giver seemed to be thinking, when I was observing you before the selection, I perceived that you probably had the capacity, and what you describe confirms that. It happened somewhat differently to me, the giver told him. When I was just your age, about to become the new receiver, I began to experience it, though it took a different form. With me it was, well, I won't describe that now. You wouldn't understand it yet. But I think I can guess how it's happening with you. Let me just make a little test to confirm my guess. Lie down. Well, Jonas lay on the bed again with his hands at his sides. He felt comfortable here now, and he closed his eyes and waited for the familiar feel of the giver's hands on his back. But it didn't come. Instead, the giver instructed him. Call back the memory of the ride on the sled, just the beginning of it, where you're at the top of the hill before the sled starts or the slide starts. And this time, look down at the sled. Well, Jonas was puzzled and he opened his eyes. Excuse me? He asked politely. But don't you have to give me the memory? Well, it's your memory now. It's not mine to experience any longer. I gave it away. But how can I call it back? You can remember last year or the year that you were 7 or 5, can't you? Well, of course. It's much the same. Everyone in the community has one generation memories like those. But now you will be able to go back farther. Try, just concentrate. And Jonas closed his eyes again and he took a deep breath and he sought the sled and the hill and the snow in his consciousness. There they were with no effort. He was again sitting in the whirling world of snowfall atop the hill, or snowflakes atop the hill. Jonas grinned with delight and blew his own steamy breath into view, and then, as he had been instructed, he looked down. He saw his own hands furred again with snow, holding the rope. He saw his legs and moved them aside for a glimpse of the sled beneath. Dumbfounded, he stared at it. This time it was not a fleeting impression. This time the sled had, and continued to have, as he blinked and stared at it again, that same mysterious quality that the apple had had so briefly, and Fiona's hair. The sled did not change. It simply was, whatever the thing was. And Jonas opened his eyes and was still on the bed, and the giver was watching him curiously. Yes, Jonas said slowly, I saw it in the sled. Let me try one more thing. Look over there to the bookcase. Do you see the very top row of books? The ones behind the table on the top shelf. And Jonas sought them with his eyes, and he stared at them, and they changed. But the change was fleeting, and it slipped away the next instant. I'd like you to take a minute, and we're going to break the questions down. Okay? And I'm going to read them, and I just kind of want you to break them down as we go. Explain how Jonas's first memory on the sled differs from his most recent memory on the sled. Now, what I will tell you is that your answer will have absolutely nothing to do with being able to see the color red. Okay, keep that in mind. I tell kids this every year, and every year I have kids that miss this question because they want to talk about how in the first memory he didn't realize it was red, and in the second memory he does. That is not what this question is looking for. Question 2. When Jonas is hurt on the sled, the giver refuses to give him medication. Why? Three, at the beginning of the story, a plane flew over the community. How would the community have responded differently if there were no trained receiver of memory? And then they want you to support your answer. And 4, summarize the unfortunate task that Jonas's father must soon face. What does this task say about the community? All right, so on your Teen Talk, I want you to write, your evidence is going to come from pages 119 through 128. That's where your evidence is coming from to answer these particular questions. Now, you may have some background knowledge that you can pull for on some of these, but not all. So you'll need textual evidence that comes from 119 through 128. All right, so this is where I sit down. Even though I've got some new shoes that are helping my hips some, I still think I probably need to have a seat. All right, so here we go. It happened, Jonas said. It happened to the books, but it went away again. I'm right then, the giver said. You're beginning to see the color red. The what? And the giver sighed. How to explain this? Once, back in the time of the memories, everything had a shape and size, the way things still do, but they also had a quality called color. There were a lot of colors, and one of them was called red. That's the one you are starting to see. Your friend Fiona has red hair. Quite distinctive, actually. I've noticed it before. And when you mentioned Fiona's hair, it was the clue that told me you were probably beginning to see the color red. And the faces of people, the ones I saw at the ceremony? And the giver shook his head. No, flesh isn't red, but it has red tones in it. There was a time, actually, you'll see this in the memories later, when flesh was many different colors. That was before we went to sameness. Today, flesh is all the same, and what you saw was the red tones. Probably when you saw the faces take on color, it wasn't as deep or vibrant as the apple or your friend's hair. And the giver chuckled suddenly. We've never completely mastered sameness. I suppose the genetic scientists are still hard at work, trying to work the kinks out. Hair like Fiona's must drive them crazy. And Jonas listened, trying hard to comprehend. And the sled, he said? It had the same thing, the color red, but it didn't change. Giver, it just was. Because it's a memory from the time when color was. It was so, I wish language were more precise. The red was so beautiful. And the giver nodded. It is. Did you see it do you see it all the time? I see all of them. All the colors. Will I? Of course. When you receive the memories, you have the capacity to see beyond, and you'll gain wisdom then, along with colors and lots more. And Jonas wasn't interested just then in wisdom. It was the colors that fascinated him. Why can't everyone see them? Why did colors disappear? And the giver shrugged. Our people made that choice. The choice to go to sameness. Before my time, before the previous time, back and back and back. We relinquished colors when we relinquished sunshine and did away with differences. And he thought for a moment. We gained control of many things, but we had to let go of others. We shouldn't have, Jonas said fiercely. And the giver looked startled at the certainty of Jonas' reaction, and then he smiled wryly. "You've come very quickly to that conclusion," he said. "It took me many years. Maybe your wisdom will come much more quickly than mine." And he glanced at the wall clock. "Lie back down now. We have much to do." "Giver," Jonas asked as he arranged himself again on the bed, "how did it happen to you when you were becoming the receiver? You said that the seeing beyond happened to you, but not the same way." The hands came to his back. "Another day," the giver said gently. "I'll tell you another day. Now we must work, and I've thought of a way to help you with the concept of color. Close your eyes and be still now. I'm going to give you a memory of a rainbow." And I want you to think about Jonas here and the weirdness of never knowing colors and living in this community where color really wasn't a thing. And I'm going to need to adjust this, so bear with me. That may help some. No. So he's living in this part of this community where everything is black and white, is really and truly what's taking place. And the giver is introducing him through the memories of this one basic color. And what Jonas is seeing for the very first time is the color red. Now, at the very last thing I read, the giver's like, "Now I'm going to give you all the colors in a rainbow." Imagine how overwhelmed you would be. You've never seen anything but black and white. And in this instant, you're going to see all of the beauty of the rainbow and just how exciting that would be. And so that's kind of where Jonas is. All right, so let's pick our book back up. Chapter 13. That's better. My head's not chopped off now. Days went by in weeks. And Jonas learned through the memories the names of colors, and now he began to see them all in his ordinary life. Though he knew it was ordinary no longer and would never be again. But that didn't last. There would be a glimpse of green, the landscaped lawn around the central plaza, a bush on the riverbank, the bright orange of pumpkins being trucked in from the agricultural fields beyond the community boundary, seen in an instant, the flash of brilliant color, but gone again, returning to their flat and hueless shade. The giver told him that it would be a very long time before he had the colors to keep. "But I want them," Jonas said angrily. "It isn't fair that nothing has color." "Not fair?" The giver looked at Jonas curiously. "Well, explain what you mean." "Well," Jonas had to stop and think it through. "If everything's the same, then there aren't any choices. I want to wake up in the morning and decide things, a blue tunic or a red one." And he looked down at himself, at the colorless fabric of his clothing. "But it's all the same, always." And then he laughed a little. "I know it's not important what you wear, it doesn't matter, but it's the choosing that's important, isn't it?" the giver asked him. And Jonas nodded. "My little brother," he began, and then corrected himself. "No, that's inaccurate. He's not my brother, not really, but this new child that my family takes care of, his name's Gabriel." "Yes, I know about Gabriel." "Well, he's right at the age where he's learning so much. He grabs toys when we hold them in front of him. My father says he's learning small muscle control. And he's really cute." And the giver nodded. "But now that I can see colors, at least sometimes, I was just thinking, what if we could hold up things that were bright red or bright yellow and he could choose instead of the sameness? Well, he might make wrong choices." "Oh," Jonas was silent for a minute. "Oh, I see what you mean. It wouldn't matter for a new child's toy, but later it does matter, doesn't it? We don't dare to let people make choices of their own." "It's not safe," the giver suggested. "Definitely not safe," Jonas said with certainty. What if they were allowed to choose their own mate and chose wrong? Or what if, he went on, almost laughing at the absurdity, they chose their own jobs? Frightening, isn't it? The giver said. And Jonas chuckled. Very frightening. I can't even imagine it. We really have to protect people from wrong choices. It is safer. Yes, Jonas agreed. Much safer. But when the conversation turned to other things, Jonas was left still with a feeling of frustration that he didn't understand. He found that he was often angry now, irrationally angry at his group mates, that they were satisfied with their lives which had none of the vibrance his own was taking on. And he was angry at himself that he could not change that for them. He tried without asking permission from the giver because he feared or knew that it would be denied. He tried to give his new awareness to his friends. I'm just looking here. That's why. I kept thinking these questions weren't working for me. All right. So we need to go back and re-break these questions down because we were looking at day 4 questions. If we'd been in class, you'd have been like, Miss Kim, this is not right. Our questions for today should have been, what do the apple, the faces in the crowd, and Fiona's hair all have in common? And then why is this important to our story? And I want you to kind of go back and look at what I've already read. And see if there's evidence that would support that. Number 2, how important is the ability to choose according to Jonas? And then support your answer. Three, explain how the way Jonas sees flowers is different from the way that Asher sees flowers. And 4, when Jonas talks about elephants with Lily, what rule is he breaking? And then support your answers. Now, I'm going to wait here just a moment and let you kind of figure out where evidence would go with these questions. And once again, I apologize, guys, but let's take a look and see where our evidence would go. All right, so let's pick back up where I stopped. Top of 125. He tried without asking permission from the giver because he feared or knew that it would be not denied. He tried to give his new awareness to his friends. "Asher," Jonas said one morning, "look at those flowers very carefully." They were standing beside a bed of geraniums planted near the Hall of Open Records. And he put his hands on Asher's shoulders and concentrated on the red of the petals, trying to hold it as long as he could, and trying at the same time to transmit the awareness of red to his friend. "What's the matter?" Jonas asked uneasily. "Is something wrong?" And he moved away from Jonas's hands. It was extremely rude for one citizen to touch another outside of family units. "No, nothing. I thought for a minute that they were wilting and we should let the gardening crew know they needed some more watering." And Jonas sighed and turned away. One evening he came home from his training weighted with new knowledge. The giver had chosen a startling and disturbing memory that day. Under the touch of his hands, Jonas had found himself suddenly in a place that was completely alien, hot and windswept under a vast blue sky. There were tufts of sparse grass, a few bushes and rocks, and nearby he could see an area of thicker vegetation, broad, low trees outlined against the sky. Well, he could hear noises, the sharp crack of weapons. He perceived the word guns, and then shouts, and an immense crashing thud as something fell, tearing branches from the trees. He heard voices calling to one another, and peering from the place where he stood hidden behind some shrubbery, he was reminded of what the giver had told him, that there had been a time when flesh had different colors. Two of these men had dark brown skin, and the others were light. Going closer, he watched them hack the tusk from a motionless elephant on the ground and haul them away, spattered with blood. He felt himself overwhelmed with a new perception of the color that he knew as red. Then the men were gone, speeding toward the horizon in a vehicle that spit pebbles from its whirling tires. One hit his forehead and stung him there. But the memory continued, though Jonas ached now for it to end. Now he saw another elephant emerge from the place where it had stood hidden in the trees. And very slowly it walked to the mutilated body and looked down. With its sinuous trunk, it stroked the huge corpse. Then it reached up and broke some leafy branches with a snap and draped them over the mass of torn, thick flesh. Finally, it tilted its massive head and raised its trunk and roared into the empty landscape. Jonas had never heard such a sound. It was a sound of rage and grief, and it seemed never to end. He could still hear it when he opened his eyes and lay anguished on the bed where he received the memories. It continued to roar into his consciousness as he pedaled slowly home. "Lily," he asked that evening when his sister took her comfort object, the stuffed elephant, from the shelf, "did you know that once there really were elephants, live ones?" And she glanced down at the ragged comfort object and grinned. "Right," she said skeptically. "Sure, Jonas." And Jonas went and sat beside them while his father untied Lily's hair ribbons and combed her hair. He placed one hand on each of their shoulders, and with all of his being, he tried to give each of them a piece of the memory, not of the tortured cry of the elephant, but of the being of the elephant, of the towering, immense creature and the meticulous touch with which it had tended its friend at the end. But his father had continued to comb Lily's long hair, and Lily's impatience had finally wiggled under her brother's touch. "Jonas," she said, "you're hurting me with your hand." "I apologize for hurting you, Lily," Jonas mumbled, and took his hand away. "Accept your apology," Lily responded indifferently, stroking the lifeless elephant. That's where our reading stops for today. And so in your journals, I want you to answer questions 1 through 4. Making sure that you include that textual evidence. You may have a couple of these that you find it difficult to find textual evidence, then make sure that you back it up with some background knowledge, okay? So that is your assignment for today, and I'll see you back here in a moment. Bye, guys.